Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from Lastcar.info coming at you after the conclusion of the South Point 400 at Las Vegas, where unofficially, pending the results of post-race inspection, Kyle Larson has now punched his ticket into the championship looking for his second Cup Series championship in the last 3 years. It is now, you got to consider him a favorite going into this. Certainly, he's in a position where he now no longer has to worry about the remaining races in the round of 8 to get in there. Although it was a very close decision at the end, Christopher Bell comes within 82 thousandths of a second of actually defeating him for the win and coming back from a race where he had wrecked out of it last year in a wreck with Larson after the fracas there with him and Bubba Wallace coming off of turn 4. Both the principals of drivers that were involved in that accident came down to settling this race between themselves. Christopher Bell had mounted a tremendous charge there towards the end of it, and we had a very good battle on our hands. But lap traffic perhaps played a role in it. Seemed like he got to the rear bumper of Kyle Larson's car, just could not quite find a way around. But again, well-deserved victory there by Kyle Larson. Maximum points, being able to sweep the stages and pull off the victory there in Las Vegas. And yes, given the track record of drivers that have won in this race or won in this round, the first race of the round of 8 puts you in a very favorable position. We saw this with Logano last year and again with Larson a couple of years ago. So we will see what happens on that. So it's going to be, quite a bit of stories to cover here. I mean, again, I'm glad to see another race that is actually allowed to kind of play out to its conclusion. We didn't need any late race restarts or anything. Just let the field get strung out. And yeah, there could be some drama in there to let things play out that way. And I'm glad it turned out that way, especially given the fact that there seem to be so many tire problems with these cars, starting with what we had in practice with both the incidents that Chase Elliott and Daniel Suarez suffered earlier in the weekend, and then seeing other problems that the Legacy Motor Club entries both had during the race itself, not to mention the loose wheel that Ty Gibbs had, followed by a cut tire of his own at the end. Very easily could have been a situation where maybe we were going to have something similar to a Texas race with all kinds of tire problems, but thankfully it wasn't really a factor in the battle for the lead itself. We saw several of the playoff drivers in the mix, or at least up and around the top 10. William Byron looked very good today. Denny Hamlin was up there for portions of this. Tyler Reddick as well. Chris Buescher had a little bit of problems there along the way. But again, sometimes it's a matter of just, which driver is going to be blinking first. And then Ryan Blaney, not to overlook him, making some big moves there to the inside of the track there at the same time. So competitive race through here. Again, unofficially in the race results here, Kyle Larson, your race winner, punching his ticket into the championship for Christopher Bell, second by 82 thousandths of a second. Then Kyle Busch in third, Brad Keselowski fourth, Ross Chastain in fifth. Those three drivers out of the playoff hunt. But then you go back to the next playoff driver would be Ryan Blaney in sixth. William Byron takes home the seventh spot. Tyler Reddick in eighth. Martin Truex Jr. on a very up and down day finishes in the ninth spot. And Denny Hamlin in 10th. And then just outside the top 10 would be Chris Buescher in 11th. None of the playoff drivers finishing any worse than that. So again, to some extent, anybody that was below the line and also kind of struggling here a little bit in the race results there, maybe not having that bad of a day, but it is still going to be an uphill challenge for drivers like Chris Buescher going forward here. But again, Chris Buescher, Tyler Reddick, guys that have good runs at Homestead next week. We'll talk more about that along the way, as well as the Xfinity portion of the race weekend here. Buescher, I wouldn't overlook him next week at being a past stage winner at Homestead a couple of years ago, back during the Gen 6 era. Denny Hamlin, of course, has pulled off wins there at Homestead before, including more recently once it got moved off the championship. Martin Truex Jr., again, drivers that have past championships or clinched championships there, one's not to overlook. William Byron being a past Homestead winner. I think it's going to be a very competitive race going forward. I have to say, I was surprised that Kyle Larson would pull off this race. I thought for sure we were going to have kind of a repeat of last year where Larson was going to come into Homestead and just absolutely dominate that race. and then coming into Martinsville, where Hendrick has always seemed to have the keys to that place. If it was a matter of trying to get William Byron in, if he ever had any struggles in these first couple of races, would really count on him being able to pull off another victory there. But this changes things, certainly, with Larson getting in there. Now I think going into races where he's already favored, are we going to have a situation where he's going to sweep all three of these races? I don't think that's outside the possibility either, even as good as these other drivers are. I think that this one was probably the most wide open for a lot of the playoff contenders, especially this particular group. I think that at Homestead and at Martinsville, it tends to kind of lean towards a driver that is really dominant, and I think you could find a driver really being in a bad situation by losing a lap or just plain not being a factor in the outcome there. I felt like with Vegas, if we had tire issues or different cautions that would come up, this would be a real chance for drivers that maybe weren't the top favored playoff guys to really make a statement and get a good firm grasp on the next round, which is why I picked Denny Hamlin for this one. I really felt that even with the past history of the wins he's had at Homestead and Martinsville, I really felt that this was his best chance to just, put his stamp on it and then not have to worry about these next rounds. I mean, I think it can't be overstated how much of an advantage this is for Larson and the 5 team. It's easy to forget just how fast they were at Homestead last year. And again, I think he's a little hot and cold at Martinsville, despite the fact that, he's won the Wilkesboro All-Star race earlier this year and obviously is not hurting for any short track speed at the same time. But my goodness, this was quite the statement race, and I'm glad it was allowed to play out to its conclusion there, that we didn't have anything really too crazy to jumble things up, and ultimately didn't need it. It just shows that you really don't need a lot of cautions to have a really dramatic finish. I mean, this was, I think they were already saying comparisons to the Jimmy Johnson and Matt Kenseth battle back in 2006 for being one of the closest finishes here. Right on top of it there with these guys. So I think it's very exciting to see. I think this is going to be definitely a very difficult cut as to which 4 are not going to make the championship. But that's always going to be the case one year to the next. And that's going to be a story to talk about there too. So, I think Bell put on a good show. I think he's going to be tough at Homestead and Martinsville. Is certainly the defending winner of the Martinsville race. Homestead, I think, the Gibbs teams, when they're set, when they're locked in, they could be just as fast as anybody else out there. But I think Larson's going to be, even with having the win and being able to kind of ease up, he might just be foot to the floor, and it might just be an easier decision to just kind of try to storm right through these here. I know it's easy to just pick on whoever is the race winner to start things off here, but that's definitely going to be one way to look at it there. So we'll find out what happens. A little bit of the rest of the running order here. We'll kind of go from the back of the field. BJ McLeod looked like he was going to be your last place finisher for a good portion of this. He lost a lap very early in the race when it sounded like he was potentially going to have a tire issue. But leading up to that, had a really tight battle between him and Brennan Poole for last place. They actually traded the spot several times at the beginning. And even before that, drivers like Chase Elliott and Suarez with their backup cars also seemed like they had trouble kind of getting back up there. At one point, the bottom 3 drivers were all separated by thousandths of a second there. But BJ being the one driver a lap down, it seemed like every time the race would restart, you'd have another driver that would fall a lap down with the pit issue. Whether it was Ross Chastain with his pass-through penalty or the other lingering controversy, that being of the drivers getting a running start on the restarts that we saw first with A.J. Allmendinger in this race here. It definitely played a factor in how this race played out as well. Allmendinger getting his lap back under the caution that ultimately did settle the last place battle, pending the results of post-race inspection. Carson Hocevar now having his second last place finish in his Cup Series career, his first since his debut at Gateway, when he was driving for Spire Motorsports in place of Corey LaJoie after the one-race suspension by Chase Elliott following his wreck with Denny Hamlin in the Coca-Cola 600. Hocevar, a couple of difficult runs here, I would have to say, after being one of the most positive drivers about the next-gen car in general and having some great top 15, top 20 runs, these first couple of them here. He gets in the wreck with Brad Keselowski at Talladega a couple weeks ago. Last week, we didn't see him in the car because Mike Rockenfeller was driving it. Rockenfeller got in the incident with Denny Hamlin that resulted in Hamlin's last place finish. And then again here, where you had the flat tire suffered by Eric Jones, another flat tire suffered by Hocevar, putting him into the turn 2 wall, and he ends up being your last place finisher. Despite this, very low attrition at the other end of the field here. Alex Bowman, the other driver that fell out of the race after a tangle off of turn 4, knocked his wheels all pointing in different directions and ultimately parking his car on the inside of turn number 1. Luckily, seeing him as well as Hocevar climbing out of the car okay. But them finishing in 35th and 36th. Ty Gibbs in the 34th spot with a loose wheel, losing 2 crew members for 2 races and costing 2 of the 8 laps he was down in this race due to that. And then ultimately cutting down another tire that resulted in the remainder of the deficit that he lost to the group, which was too bad. He was about a 15th at 20th place car before that, but drops further back. Chase Briscoe also brought up in this broadcast for trying to get a good run out there. His run has also turned sideways with a flat tire and spinning him into the wall. Ends up 4 laps down in 33rd. And Chase Elliott's backup car running at the bottom 5 in the 32nd spot. Again, this all pending the results of post-race inspection. BJ McLeod getting his lap back from one of the cautions, losing a lap down again towards the end of it, but finishing 1 lap down in the 31st spot. Brennan Poole just ahead of him. McLeod, Poole, and J.J. Yaley in the other Rick Ware car were other drivers that were towards the back of the field around the time of the Hocevar incident, but that was the situation there. I think the other thing that would be important to jump on here, touched on that just a moment ago there, again, the controversy about A.J. Allmendinger and catching up on the restart. It seemed like in a lot of the replays that they were showing of these particular incidents, that the entire field was bunched up. And it just happened to be that this was the most glaring example of it, that there was a bit of a gap. And you could see, I think they were just looking for any driver that was jumping to the outside and then went back to the replay. And then with the other driver, what was it, Chase Elliott that got caught with this too? You had a couple of guys that got caught with this particular issue there. I do know that NASCAR, especially on the initial starts, have been very picky about when the drivers stop swerving, stop cleaning their tires and actually bunch up for the restart. I didn't see them being this strict about it on the ensuing restarts here. And I think in both these cases here we saw with this, I think they were just looking for any situation where a driver jumped out of line and saying that they were getting too much of an advantage. It's really tricky to say because I think at the other extent of it, you could have a jackrabbit start at the very front of the pack. You could say just as easily, I think a lot of the moves that Ryan Blaney was making on the inside lane, it could have been just as easily analyzed as being a situation of jumping the start, especially since on these starts, you're allowed to go to the outside and not have a penalty. But if you go to the inside there, I mean, again, the shorter way around, I always viewed that as being something more, critically examined here. So it is a bit surprising. I don't know if we're going to see more of this in these final couple rounds here. Probably not going to see as much of an issue at Martinsville where the groove really is right up against the wall. But certainly at Homestead, you think back to the Truck Series Championship in 2003 coming down to a driver jumping out of line in particular cases there. That could be a situation. It did seem like NASCAR was being unusually picky on this, but I guess they're really trying to prepare everybody so that it's not going to be a situation at Phoenix. Although policing anything there is going to be really strange because you already have the situation where everybody could just dive bomb to the inside in turn 1, and that's going to be the case. But clearly Allmendinger was not happy on the radio. There was a lot of traffic that was being posted there on social media there to kind of track what was happening there. Can't blame him, especially after the highest of highs last week with Allmendinger pulling off the victory and then coming back out here to have the struggles that he did along the way. But regardless, still at least able to climb out of the bottom portion of the field here with Hocevar being your last place finisher. I think that if there was another thing that really stands out from this weekend's racing that is the case, and this will be, and I know I get criticisms about this on past shows here as well, but we're going to talk about it again, folks. The broadcast quality in general of this. I think that To a lesser extent, we seem to see this in the Cup Series race today, but certainly in the Xfinity Series race yesterday, and we'll talk about that in the portion of it here. I think the presence of mind to build a storyline around what is happening is still a little bit lacking. I think in this one here, it worked out better because there were playoff drivers, and every one of them were factors in the top 10. And there was much more of a close following as to, who was going to be dropping off or who was going to have some kind of a miscue on pit road. Their focus was like right where the action was. And so that was, that was good. I do think that Rick Allen in particular seemed to be caught off guard about Christopher Bell catching Larson, and that wasn't fully capitalized as good as it could have been. Coming down to the last couple of laps when you could really tell that Bell was catching him there. I mean, it seemed like it was doing a little bit better, but it wasn't. It seemed like that was something that should have been anticipated earlier. And I hate it whenever somebody is catching the leader, they're always questioning. It's like, well, they're not really going to have enough time, or they make it sound like, oh, there's no reason to be excited about this. It's like, no. This is for a championship berth. Whoever wins this race among the playoff guys, and with all of them up there in a knot, and being as equally matched as they seem to be in this race, the fact that any of them was catching him, that should have been 100% of their focus. Which finally we got to that point with maybe about 2 laps to go. This was much more relevant, again, for the Riley Herbst deal. I think it's more of splitting hairs when it comes to the Cup Series one, because I thought they called it decently. Rick Allen kind of fell back into what he did with Talladega and kind of the photo finish there between Ryan Blaney and Kevin Harvick before Harvick's disqualification, of course. But in Saturday's race, I think that the way that the commentary was approached didn't take into consideration the events that were actually playing out. And we'll kind of jump into that at the same time. Did everyone hear Rick Allen breathing extremely loudly? I've always wondered if I'm only the one that notices that, Willie B. But yeah, there's been a lot of that at the same time. I think that he must have the microphone a lot closer. But yeah, I could hear him taking breaths, or you can almost hear the gutter. What's that called? The guttural stop or something where you swallow. Like, yeah, it's getting a little bit obnoxious there with that. I don't know if they just turned up the main a little bit too much, but yeah. But all in all, I'd say, today's race here was solid. And I think it was I can almost say that it was like a push for the championship guys, because were all so even. And again, I think Homestead, it plays out in a similar manner, because you can have drivers that are on the lead lap and can stay up with the leader. And even though you have all these different options for grooves and finding your way around and everything, guys like Kyle Larson, guys like Tyler Reddick, are going to be ones you're going to have to watch, because they're going to be able to be running that higher lane there all the time. And they're going to be tough. And again, I think like this race, you're going to have very low attrition. So if you have any kind of a miscue next week, we didn't really see that here. We didn't see anything too catastrophic for any of the playoff guys. So the possibility still exists that it could be a situation next week. What we did see was anybody that was below the cut line and out by a certain margin, we didn't see significant gains by any of them, or we didn't see it. And we saw in some cases, like drivers like Chris Buescher, by being last in that group, even though it was an 11th place finish, putting him in a situation where, the complexion of how this is going to play out is going to be very different next week. So we'll see how that certainly works out. Glad you guys get a kick out of the Lake Speed shirt for sure. I definitely wanted to wear this today. Big thanks to Stapleton 42 for their effort on the Lake Speed effort and getting that 83 car back out there. This is definitely one of my favorite paint jobs from the early 90s there, 1992 into 1993, that famous Purex car there. It took me forever to find it ever in diecast. I didn't even know it was like that. It was in diecast when I was a kid. You find it much more recently these days here. But again, great videos there. If you haven't subscribed to his channel, highly recommend it. And they sent a very nice note with this here as well. So I definitely want to make sure to wear it on the show to thank them for that. As well as in mid-October is one of the times I remembered seeing this particular car racing. I think it was back during the fall Charlotte race. And he had a really good run out there in like 92, 93, and back during that time period. One of those memories that kind of stands out a bit. So it was a lot of fun seeing that paint scheme back out there with the effort they had at the same time. Another thing I want to talk about, so I kind of want to jump into the Xfinity race already and kind of address the elephant in the room here. First and foremost, I want to offer my congratulations once more to Riley Herbst for pulling off his first Xfinity win in his 139th start at his home track. And one thing I think that the broadcast actually did a decent job of in this particular broadcast was mentioning the fact that a lot of the first-time winners this year won at their home track, including Sam Mayer at Road America. That was a pretty cool coincidence there. I know with Riley Herbst in general, he has his share of detractors, and I certainly get that. I personally am not a big fan of pay drivers out there. I know that there's situations where you have drivers that occupy certain seats, and those are fewer opportunities for other drivers to come in and compete, or fewer sponsors for them to pick up. I get that. My standpoint has always been, compete at that point then. Not really ask for a handout. If you have a driver, you have a bunch of paid drivers in there. I think the motivation for anybody that's an underdog in that situation, just put your best foot forward out there and compete. Go out there and try to battle them the very best you can. And I always have faith in NASCAR itself that if you don't belong, if you're a driver that is, you're just there because of, however much money you have available or what opportunities you have, but there's not that bit of talent that's allowed you to stay in there, the sport will cycle you out. It may not happen like right away. It may not happen like, immediately. It may not happen, in as quickly as you may anticipate. But I do believe it does happen. And we've seen this in the past with countless drivers, whether they've made a few starts or a few full-time starts, and nobody is too big to fail in that respect. I think Danica Patrick is probably the best example of that, for how much money was behind her effort, what team she was able to sign with, and how much hype there was behind her. Even at the end of the day, she's not competing full-time in the Cup Series now. So I think that if that talent wasn't there, the driver wouldn't stay in there. So, and I mentioned this in the case of Riley Herbst because I do think there's a lot of people that maybe aren't the biggest fans of him or, has a share of detractors there in that respect. But, he's come close a number of times. He's had some close finishes, runner-up finishes in the Xfinity series. It's not like he's been completely out to lunch here. He's been also competing, trying to get into the playoffs or trying to get past the first round of the playoffs. And it must be said, his Cup Series performances have been absolutely impressive since the start of this. I know there was a big wreck at the end of the Daytona 500, but he had to be able to be near the front of the pack to capitalize on that and get a 10th place finish in the 500. And then this fall race at Talladega we saw a couple weeks ago made a believer out of me. I was very impressed with the 10 laps he led in that race, most of them under green. Stayed around the top 5 most of the day in a very competitive race where you had playoff scenarios playing out, where you had drivers desperate to try to make the next round, and probably everybody watching him to try to make some kind of a mistake. And ultimately, the wreck that happened at the end that he was involved in was just coming to the stripe, and it wasn't his fault. He got contact from Corey LaJoie that turned him sideways, and what happened from there, and he still was able to improve on his best finish. So I was very impressed with, how he's been performing this year. I don't think it's gone unnoticed. And as frustrating as it was, and he mentioned this in his Victory Lane interview, that team wasn't in the playoffs, much like his teammate Cole Custer there, with way more Cup experience, mind you, in the 00. Trying to get his first win and trying to punch his ticket there. I thought it was tremendous. I thought it was a great story of him being able to pull off this win. Also, right after he got a contract extension with Stewart-Haas. And I think that deserved as much attention as it could have. I will say that I think that I was very disappointed by how the way that the broadcast covered that. Because I get it on the one hand, that he's not a playoff driver, that him winning is not going to really have any bearing on the playoffs directly, except for, preventing somebody else from straight punching their ticket, like John Hunter Nemechek coming from last place on the grid to finish second in the race, which was impressive in its own respect. But I think much more of the broadcast should have been about that. And we had a good discussion about that. We had some interesting comments on that on social media, and talking about that. And my point in that was like, does this broadcast feel like it's a race that could potentially, of course, not knowing what was going to happen at the end of the race, potentially be a driver winning their first ever Xfinity Series race? And I think a lot of the answers were no. It didn't really feel that way. Now I get it. If you're talking, stage 1, stage 2, or, halfway through the race, anything can happen. Anything could. And I think there's a school of thought where it would be, well, do you really want to count your chickens before the finish of this race? No, you're not going to be giving it to him. But you need to recognize, as a lot of people on social media were during this race, that he was kind of crossing some thresholds here that indicated that this was a very exceptional performance for him, that he was leading more laps than he had in any one Xfinity Series race, or that he was leading more laps than he had in any one Xfinity season. He was running exceptionally well. And at that point, when you are broadcasting a race there, you need to give that its due. And I know it's so easy to say that from this yellow chair here a day after the race, but you have to do that. And I know, and if your concern is doing it too early, you can factor that into the play-by-play as well. Because what'll happen is if, say, he's leading a lot of this race, he leads 2/3 of it, and maybe he has a bad pit stop, or he cuts a tire down, or something else happens that takes him out of contention. Then you make a big deal out of that moment. And it's like, oh, he was having a career run. We thought today was going to be the day, and it didn't happen, but he really distinguished himself, and it's a good run. And now that does two things. First of all, it's not a rope-a-dope thing. It's not a switching things up here and not making it compelling for the fans or anything. It is making the race still memorable. And the second thing is that it's memorable because the next time he does, if he didn't win this race, if it was some later race that he broke through and won, then that would be a moment that you could bring back. It's like, think back to Las Vegas where, he led 2/3 of the race and then a bad pit stop cut him down. I mean, think about all the moments that happened like Michael Waltrip's career, or think about the 500 days deal where I talked about Dave Blaney and he came very close to winning that Atlanta race. That was handled perfectly. That you recognize, there's a lot of moments in that even in a race that obviously, in hindsight, is completely remembered as Kevin Harvick's, first career Cup victory, as well it should be. In the moment, you had that moment where it was a big deal made out of how Dave Blaney was performing and that he was potentially going to be on his way to his first Cup win. And then that gets remembered. And so it could be brought up in future Atlanta races or future races in the season. And so I think that's important. And I really did feel like this was lacking in the broadcast. I felt that you could approach that so many different ways. And I'm not saying you're calling him to the finish for 70 laps. That's absurd. But you bring up other things about him. You show his family. You explain who his family is. You explain his background in racing. You explain how he got into the Xfinity Series. You really, again, how many times do I bring up on this show that it's very important to present these drivers as people and their storylines as a life of a person, and multiply that by, 38 cars in Xfinity field or 36 to 40 in a Cup field or whatever. That's what makes it really come to life. That's what makes people want to learn more about these drivers, or maybe a driver becomes your favorite driver. That I think is what really needs to be happening. And for most of that broadcast yesterday, I really didn't get that feeling. I really felt like they were just using the same copy and paste approach. That's like, well, let's see how this playoff guy is doing. Oh, we'll see how this guy is doing. And ordinarily, and I don't believe this is a contradiction to pointing out that, if a race is, being dominated by somebody, as Herbst clearly was in this case, winning it by more than 15 seconds, you're looking through the field. You can do that. Why not both? You can talk about the championship contenders. You could go throughout the field and, something's happening. You don't want to miss anything else at the exclusion of it too. But, the refrain, it's like a song. The chorus of this should be who is up front and what is at stake and what this potentially means for the driver. Yes, other things are happening and you pay attention to that too when you need to. and that situational awareness needs to be there. But you can't forget the refrain. You can't just say, well, now it's 10 seconds. Well, now it's 12 seconds. Well, now it's 30 to go. Well, now it's 20 to go. It's like, no. It's got to be more than that. You can't just do, I really do feel like there's this rut that a lot of these broadcasters fall into. And it's unfortunate to see it with NBC in particular, because I do feel like they're willing to innovate and change things up and make things a little bit, just make things just a little bit different, just for the sake of trying to avoid getting into something like that. But they seem just completely unwilling to when it comes to what's happening in the booth. Rick Allen's going to talk too slow. Steve Letart's going to talk too loud and too fast. And Jeff Burton and Dale Jr. are going to sound exactly like each other. So which is four people in the booth being too much. And it's the same way every time, whether it's a big moment in the championship or it's somebody going for their first win that's been, having years of futility, despite, having a lot of backing and being in a top ride and so forth, and facing a lot of criticism and just be honest about that criticism too. I mean, I get that not everybody's a big fan of that too, but I think that's what's really important. And I thought that was disappointing. I didn't think it was fair to Riley. I think that it's really glaring. If you watch the clip that Riley Herbst posted that night, he synced it up with like a Kanye West music or something like that. And he plays clips from the broadcast, and the broadcast, it's not anything exceptional. It's the same, kind of flat milquetoast delivery from any other race. And he really has to kind of spice it up with this other stuff in there. And I'm constantly reminded of like the hard work that people that put together these montages for the broadcast must feel when there's not that through goes Hamilton moment. There's not that big moment that really ties it all together. There's not that extra bit of excitement, like Mike Joy calling Kevin Harvick's win, or even again, the group describing, the crestfallen moment for Dave Blaney in that moment too. You could make montages very easy about that. That's why in those videos, there's some things I don't have to talk over, because the moment and how it's captured is captured so well that anything I add to it is going to be a distraction. Anything I or anybody else would add would be a distraction. But too often today, it's like the video that Riley Herbst tweeted. It's just that, like, it's got to be spiced up a little bit. And at the end of the day, I don't think he cares. At the ultimate, he's got the win, he's celebrating it, and he's happy. Fine. I'm not going to tell somebody to not be happy when they're happy. But I think that it really speaks to the modern approach of broadcasting for that to be lacking, because there are signposts that you can notice when somebody is performing better than they usually are, or in a case like this where they're dominating and now they're running like really well, and then make the audience nervous for a caution. Don't make the problem with the typical approach to their broadcast is that you're hoping for a caution. It's like, oh, this is boring. This sucks. This guy's leading by too much. I hope we get a caution and then we get another restart, and gee golly, wouldn't that be great? It's like, no. Excuse me. Still coming off the cold here, folks. I apologize. But that's what really needs to happen. You got to really just ramp everybody up there and get it so that, you're on edge with everybody else. Because if you're not that invested in it, you're not, it's so much already to ask for people to sit down and watch these for hours on end. Really ramp up the drama. I'm going to take a drink here, folks. So, yeah. So I think that's it. I know I'm hammering that too much, but I think it's so important. And every week, it seems like we get a new example of where it's not working and where it really needs to be looked at more. And so I think that's important. And excuse me. Just because I'm pointing this out on NBC doesn't mean there's nothing that Fox can learn from this too, especially in their Truck Series broadcast. They have a lot of issues with that. So we'll find out, if there's going to be any improvement there. But I just don't know who's directing them or who's pointing this stuff out here. Because it's a shame. Because I do think we're having great racing. We're having great storylines. And again, you may not be a fan of Riley Herbst. You may not care one way or the other how he performs. But in that moment, I mean, and again, if that's part of the story, make that part of the story. Say, like, look, some people aren't a fan of him, but, maybe they will be now, and focus on the crowd cheering or something like that. There have been unpopular drivers through the sport too. But I think it's, I think that's important. So, and especially in the Xfinity series, where you got people that really are literally making a name for themselves. Thank God we have all these Cup Series guys scaled back as much as they have been. I still think they need to just push that just over the edge, just to make sure they don't start encroaching back in here a little bit. But I think the fact that you're seeing these drivers win and have good runs it can only be positive. And for those that are saying, oh, well, who knows how well they're gonna compete against Cup guys, look at Riley Herbst. Look at how well he did at Talladega. There's been so many people dumping on the Truck Series for saying, like, oh, this is just a complete crash fest and it's not developing drivers at all. And then you look at Carson Hocevar, who himself was being criticized a lot for how aggressive he drove and how many wrecks he was involved in. And he is like the most vocal standout in terms of like supporting the next gen car and racing well in it. Yes, he's had a couple bad runs these last couple of rounds, but I don't think that negates the fact that he was having top 15 runs with way less experience than he does now. That's what needs to be looked at. And honestly, when I look at Riley Herbst's story, I'm kind of reminded of the Derek Cope deal there, and working on the book, listening to the audio book and getting that stuff ready. And again, we'll go ahead and do the crossover here. The book release still coming up on November 14th, Tuesday the 14th. We premiered the trailer on the stream here last week. It's still, it's a very similar situation where, the driver accomplishes everything that you would think would be worthy of fame, whether it's, getting a ride in the Cup Series, working your way up there from whatever backgrounds you have, earning a ride, earning a position, and racing that car up to, contention. But maybe just the way that they won is like, that's the gate. It's like, oh, that's the ceiling. It's like, we can't view this the same way as the way somebody else won. I think that, if this was the only win that Riley Herbst ever gets in his Xfinity Series career, that still puts him heads and shoulders ahead of drivers that have never won. I mean, you think of all the drivers that have been talented that have never won in their careers. So I think that's another part of it there. But it's just amazing to me how not all accomplishments are treated the same, and not all victories are the same. Because I mean, ultimately, however you feel about a driver, or whatever background they have, or what hoops they did or did not necessarily have to jump through to get there, they're still doing it. And whether or not he should have, if Riley should have 20 wins by now for the equipment that he has, I mean, that's a matter of opinion. I mean, the fact is he's driven in those races, and it took him to get in that win. And again, if it is what really is important when it comes to talking about that. So, that's kind of my thoughts on that deal there. But I really wish that broadcast was handled a bit better, because the everything was there, and I'm like, if you just tuned in late and saw him leading, you would probably think, oh, well, here's a guy, he never wins. Maybe he's just out on old tires and he's trying a different strategy, and he'll pit, and then the real guy is going to be winning the race. That's the problem with not approaching it the right way. That's the problem with waiting till the last 10 laps, or I think it was like 4 laps in this case, when they really started showing the family and all that. That was the other part too. And actually, I got a good comment on this earlier today about showing the family and all that. I'm not a big fan of the quote unquote wife cam either, especially in the Indy 500, where it takes up the full screen or a half screen, and you're looking over here and you're looking there. There's different ways of doing that. You look at classic broadcasts where even if they did it as a full screen, it would be very brief. It wouldn't be an entire segment, and you're just like, what are they doing? The Kim Burton deal, I mean, I hate to single her out because it's not her fault that they always single her out, but it's always these networks, for some reason, you have any, back when Harrison Burton would be competing up there, or Jeff Burton himself, they'd always be showing her in big part of the screen. That's not the same thing. We're talking about the first time winner. And I think it's excusable to have a situation where, here, I'm going to unplug this. I'm sorry about that. There we go. You have a situation where you have somebody that's performing above and beyond their usual level, and they're actually able to be, competing and trying to get their first win. That's where you should be focusing on the family. That's where you should be showing, the first-time winners are special. First-time winners are special. They belong under a different kind of set of rules, and that's where I think it needs to come into play. So that would kind of be a different way to look at that too. Let's see here. So so that's a big part of my thoughts on that one. Beast of Metal, thank you so much for the super chat here as well. Paid drivers will linger as long as the money is needed for motorsport. Still sad and disturbing to see small teams push to use the unqualified because of financial desperation. Unrelated question, what is Quinn Houff up to now? Good question. My short answer is I don't know what Quinn's up to now. It was interesting to kind of describe him in the Derek Cope book. But that's kind of the thing. We saw Ryan Reed pop back up in the Xfinity series this week. First time in 5 years seeing him compete in the series. And it's kind of unusual, when a driver turns back up, whether it's a big name or small name or anybody in between. So in short, I'm not sure exactly what he's up to. But it's a valid point, though, Beast of Metal. Yeah, I mean, it is a commentary on how much money is needed to get into NASCAR in general, and especially a top flight ride. Certainly that's been a factor in Riley Herbst's career. He's not unique in that respect. I'm sure every one of you watching this can think of a couple of drivers that fit in that same category there. And it's unfortunate, but again, I think I still do have faith in the staying power of a driver. There's something ethereal. There's something just outside the sport itself where if you don't belong, you're not going to stay in there. Like if you don't fit in, I think the drivers do to an extent still kind of police themselves, and NASCAR themselves have a role in, there's so much business that goes on behind the scenes that all of us, myself included, are just not privy to. And that itself could determine who is and who is not in the field. Talking with Andy Belmont for his Rise of the Field fillers deal. There was that time where the fillers were needed because they didn't have enough cars to fill the fields, and there were apparently requests to have 43 car fields under the TV contracts. Otherwise, why go to this extent to make sure you had that number of cars there, even if people parked early in the race? But then there would be a time after you had enough full-time teams to fill the fields that Belmont would bring his car in, and then suddenly this wasn't right, and this wasn't right, and this wasn't right, and he couldn't get the car on the track through inspection, so therefore you're basically prevented from racing that way. Things like that, I'm sure, happen behind the scenes all the time, and it may be just as much a factor with sponsorship as it is cars going through inspection. And I think that's another way to look at that. But as much as I do think that there are artificial means of keeping drivers out, I do think that from one year to the next, if things didn't work out, there's only so many spots out there that anybody in the entire world can compete in. If it's just 38 spots in Xfinity, if it's just 36 in Cup, basically, or 36 in the Truck Series, it's still going to be a situation where you're not going to get that many people. And we've seen international competitors come into the Cup Series, and then even they have limited opportunities. Now, in the Cup Series, you have the chartered system, and the fact that 40 is kind of an imaginary number at this point because it's so unprofitable to enter an open entry. But I think that's another way to look at that, too. So I agree. It's definitely another one to look at the same time there, Beast of Metal. I appreciate you bringing that up because I think that is another way to... it is another commentary. It's not just on the driver himself, but also just, the nature of the sport and, dollars per horsepower. I mean, it's like, how fast do you want to go? How much money are you going to shovel into this? That's just the way it comes down in any form of racing. And NASCAR's certainly not immune from that. But again, I think that, that kind of goes back to the original point of, you compete. You compete. If you don't like a pay driver that's in there and they have these advantages and so forth, It means that much more when somebody else that maybe has talent but doesn't have the biggest team out there, they compete with them, or they beat them on the track, or they win a race before that driver. That's important too. But I do think that with Riley in particular, I think there's a little bit more to the story. And we're seeing this more from other people that were congratulating him and showing him earlier in his career, you got to have a sponsor. You got to have all the other little parts that get you out there. And not everybody is able to get that figured out at the same time in the same way. But I still think it's exciting for him. And I think it's good to be happy for him. And I'm very excited. I hope this really does get him some more opportunities to run in the Cup Series. Now, do I think he should be full-time next year? No, I don't think so. I think it's definitely, it's good that he's full-time in Xfinity again next year. I think it's very much, it should give us reason to anticipate that he should have a chance at potentially punching his ticket into the Xfinity Series Championship playoffs next year, given the fact that he now has that first win out of the way and could potentially win a race in the regular season, much like we saw with Chris Buescher in the Cup Series this year. Yes, his first win with RFK wasn't his first career win, but by winning in the playoffs last year, undoubtedly, he carried that momentum into this year and where we see him, where we see him now. So I think it's another way to certainly look at that. So there's that deal too. Oh, Stuffster Network. Thank you for posting the information there about Quinn as well. I'm sorry, I'm just reading your comments here. Yeah. I'll see. There you go. So, yeah, I mean, again, driver like Quinn Half, I mean, you never know when a driver leaves the sport or tries to come back into there, in any way. But, and yeah, these drivers have different things that happen in their lives, and that could certainly change the complexion of what happens with him too. So, yeah. Antihistamines, you consider him? Oh man, I've been on since our last show. Yeah, I've been on everything. We got cough syrup, we got everything else here. It's been everything. We're now at the point where this has started to clear up, and now it's like all in the chest, and it's a matter of just getting it out. I'm sure by this show next week, hopefully, it won't be as irritating to listen to me cough on the show here. So we'll see how that plays out. All right. So let me get into. Hang on. Let me pull this back up here. So Riley Herbst, your winner in the Xfinity Series race. Playoff contenders were spread out a little bit further in this case. The next 6 spots behind him were all playoff contenders, starting with John Hunter Nemechek, Cole Custer, Chandler Smith, Sam Mayer, your top 5, Justin Allgaier in 6th, Austin Hill in 7th, Brandon Jones, the 8th spot, Daniel Hemrick in 9th, and Lane Riggs in just his second Xfinity Series start, finishing in the 10th spot. Great effort for him. Sheldon Creed, after the backbreaking news this week that he was not going to drive for Childress next year, right after punching his ticket into the next round of the playoffs here. Comes out of this race here in the 15th spot. We'll see what the deal is going to be for him next year, how things are going to shake out. But undoubtedly comes into the next week's race at Homestead with a difficult challenge of his own there. But we'll see how that shakes out, if he's able to make it in the Final Four or not. And then Semmy Smith with a couple of bad pit stops there, dropping him back. Last of the playoff drivers. 17th spot may not sound that bad, but much like we saw in the Cup Series race today, with the other contenders that close to the top 10 and filling those spots up, very much a different situation there too. So we'll see. Your last place finisher in this, Patrick Emmerling. This was, unlike today's race, settled very early on. I believe the 13th time that a driver has fallen out after completing fewer than 4 laps of an Xfinity Series race at Las Vegas. Emmerling falls out with a crash after the engine blows in the first corner, and this would not be the first time that we would see this happen. Another more spectacular engine failure about mid-pack, started by Kaz Gralla, just dropped oil on the entire first corner, had a big pile up there. Kind of reminded me of the big wreck that we had there when I covered that race last year. I guess it was the one where J.G. Ailey was driving in there. It was either last year or the year before. They had a big, a big wreck in turn one. I think it was actually 2 years ago. But that could be a real treacherous corner there in NASCAR's circuit there. And it certainly was this time around, filling up the rest of the bottom five after Joe Graff Jr. had an accident on the front straightaway, getting jacked up behind Brett Moffitt there. But Patrick Emmerling being your last place finisher, the first last place run of his Xfinity career. Big thanks to Dominic Aragon over at the Racing Experts for providing a picture used in that article as well. And being able to do that with the coverage there. I really hated missing out the race this weekend, especially with the solar eclipse this weekend too, which is pretty crazy. It sounded like they had a great turnout, certainly on the media side there. And decent crowds from that. I know there were people splitting hairs about how many people were actually in the stands, but it seemed like a good turnout in general for the race there. And I know people getting a preview also of what the Formula One course is going to look like down on the strip too. So no shortage of stuff going on this year. But Vegas is always I really enjoy going to that track. It's a beautiful facility. I think it's one of the most accessible for fans, both in terms of its fan zone with its shade and everything, and also like how easy it is to get from one end to the next. So very enjoyable, very modern track there as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if we'll do it next year, but we'll see how things play out on that end there. But Emmerling, your last place finisher. Joe Graff Jr., Kyle Weatherman, Kaz Scralla, and Anthony Alfredo, your bottom five there. And still, the Lastcar Championships, as we get down to the last couple of races of this season, still very much wide open. Ty Dillon has been sitting in second in the Cup Series Lastcar standings for a good portion of the season, since BJ McLeod took the lead at Darlington with his last place run out there. Since Ty has more bottom fives and bottom tens, if he finishes last in any of these next couple of races, he could take the lead, and potentially, if it happens, if the standings are still the same at Phoenix, he could take the championship at the last race of the year. So it'll be we're not quite ready to print certificates yet, but we're very close. Xfinity is very similar. Xfinity is actually even tighter because Parker Kligerman and Greg Van Alst have the only drivers with two last place finishes this year. Both of them, those are their only bottom fives this year. Kligerman, of course, being in the playoffs earlier this season, has had a very consistent year. It's absolutely not a measure of any kind of futility or anything this year. It just so happens that he's one of only two drivers that has two last place finishes. Otherwise, he wouldn't be leading the standings. In fact, if any of the 16 drivers behind them in the Lastcar standings finish last at Homestead, for example, they could take the lead immediately, because they have more bottom fives and bottom tens than either Kligerman or Greg Van Alst. So that could definitely be a factor. So we're not ready to print certificates for that yet. Could end up being a whole heck of a lot of them, depending on what happens here at Homestead and Martinsville. Last year, we saw Bailey Curry jump up into the standings with the last place run at Martinsville. That was his second last place finish. And he ended up taking the title the last second there at Phoenix. Will we see that scenario again? I mean, stay tuned. We're going to find out. The closest that we're coming to a Lastcar standing crowning one would be in the Truck Series, where Josh Realm and Keith McGee are leading the standings. Again, I don't know what it is with these two drivers at the top of each of these standings being so close, but that's just kind of the way it worked out. Josh Realm is pretty much the only one that's able to really be in position to lock up the title, or at least take a step toward it. I believe in most cases, if Josh finishes last at Homestead this next Saturday as the current leader, he would pretty much have the Lastcar Championship, because it'll eliminate anybody else that had only one finish, because they're not going to be able to get that close. And it would depend if Keith McGee gets a bottom five or not. The trick is McGee drives for Josh, or at least had earlier this year. He popped back out to drive Talladega as well recently, despite original plans to move back home to Alaska. Will he be a factor in these next couple of races? I don't know. We're going to have to find out once we see the entry list. That'll solve part of the puzzle for this weekend. And then, of course, I'll break down these scenarios more in the entry list preview, which will be posted this coming Friday. So we'll find out on that. But those are kind of the big stories coming up here on this end. Good to see Ryan Reed back out there. Kind of touched on him a little bit. Finishing in the 20th spot there for Alpha Prime in coordination with Motorsports Business Management. Ryan Ellis was actually driving Carl Long's entry and Reed was in the 20th spot. A lot of focus on Dawson Cram. I got a lot of messages about this this weekend here with Cram running so well in practice, much like Carson Hocevar in the Cup race today. Running 6th fastest in practice, 21st in qualifying. Again, Kevin Cram being a championship level crew chief, working with Bill Elliott in the early 2000s. And then in this, Elliott not winning a championship with his team, but still, again, very competent crew chief aboard there in the 74 team. Getting some good runs. Unfortunately, things just didn't kind of go their way at the end, and they end up back in the in the 31st position there at the finish. So an unfortunate deal there, but very similar to what we saw them out of Texas and Michigan, especially at Texas, where they were on the lead lap for so much of that race, despite having a spin in the late stages. And again, I think this will be something very exciting for CHK Racing going into next season. Hopefully they can keep both of them on and maybe build something even more out of that organization. So we'll find out. Parker Retzlaff, right outside the top 10 there, finishing in the 14th spot. Looking at other drivers throughout the field here. Daniel Dye making his second Xfinity start, along with Lane Riggs finishing in 21st. And again, another Alpha Prime entry. Solid run. He's right there with the other teammates. With Raja Karuth with the knocked out crush panel back in the 23rd spot. Then Ryan Ellison in the aforementioned Carl Long entry in 27th. So yeah, I think there's some positives to look forward to at the same time there. So yeah, I mean, that's most of my thoughts there for the Cup and Xfinity Series side here. And yeah, definitely things to talk about from this weekend. How many laps do you think Bell needed to pass him? No tires, just gas. I don't know. It's a tough call. I mean, I think that it could very easily, I think one more lap. I think he pretty much had him right there. If he dive bombed him into turn one, I think we got a whole different race at that point. I know that Kyle Larson was picking the inside lane towards the end there for the restarts. Who knows how it would have played out on the high lane there, but it would have been close. It was close as it was, but we'll find out. I think that story will check back up next time. If I ran fast a lot, you could print me a certificate. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, we're gonna print those in advance. I like laminating them in particular, so they don't get spindled and bent up and stuff like that. I already have the pouch that I set aside from last year. We lost BJ McLeod's. I lost. I don't know why I'm doing the royal we here. I lost BJ McLeod's certificate last year on the pit road before the championship race. So hopefully somebody picked that up and just got a souvenir out of it. So we'll hopefully have a better situation on that this season in the Trucks Xfinity and the Cup Series. So lots coming up on that. Let's see. Alrighty. Oh, condolences. No tires, just gas. Just seeing your comment there as well. Certainly. We'll go ahead and jump into our trivia section here. If there's any, I feel like I kind of whizzed through that pretty quick. If there's anything else you'd like me to talk about from the Cup Series or the Xfinity Series side or anything else on that subject, definitely let me know in the chat. We'll do some trivia questions here, and I guess I can tell you a little bit more about what other things I'm working on my end here. So we'll bring out the late 1990s Trivial Pursuit deal here. We'll do a couple questions here to wrap up the show for this evening. Categories, once again, are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Those are the categories. Once again, NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. So please mention which category you'd like there in that, and we'll do a couple questions. We are still firmly in the countdown for the release of Cope, which is going to be in paperback, ebook, and the audiobook. Touched on this a little bit earlier here. Again, Tuesday, November 14th is going to be the release. Big thanks to those of you checking out the video. We posted it live after our show last week. And we got a lot of exciting stuff we're working on here. We're starting to get back reviews. The reviews have been very positive so far. Also got some good corrections, actually, from a couple of our reviewers as well. So I'm very excited to get that going. Actually, among the people that have read this and are among the reviewers are Mike Joy himself from Fox Sports, who I'm very happy was able to get back to me on this, because he was the first person to get back to me on the J.D. McDuffie book. He offered some fantastic review, as well as some corrections in there to make sure to just kind of get this thing smoothed out. Because unlike the last one there, we're not really working with a publisher with all those resources. So that is massively helpful. And again, any of the other media contacts that I've reached out to, if you're watching this, absolutely I'm open to any other corrections or anything else on that too. Our review window is going to close this Friday. At that point, I'm going to get the cover design finalized, get the reviews put into the listing, and get that going. And then by early November, we're going to start submitting files online into Amazon. That'll coincide pretty much with the trip to Phoenix. And I'd like to be able to do some more promotions on the book there. Again, I won't have any copies on hand, but we'll be able to at least promote and talk about the book there. And then the Tuesday after we get back Tuesday the 7th, and then the following Tuesday the 14th, the book will be released. I'm now hearing that the audiobook may be delayed a little bit from the release of the paperback and the ebook. The reason for this is that the audiobook has to be attached to an existing paperback listing, and that is going to go live on the 14th. So from that day forward is when the audiobook will be available, but it will be complete by that time for sure, because those edits we're going to finish after the review window closes, and that'll be all set, which will be great. So the rough draft of the audiobook is done. We're going to finish cleaning that up there with the new corrections in there and getting that set up there, and then just make sure this book's just the very best it can be for the first edition there. There'll likely be a second edition further down the line. There always is every time the book comes out. I know when I released the JD book, other new information came out and required a second edition, and which I was happy to do. We got some other information, kind of cleared things up on that. And I think especially once, I think it's with this one here, it's going to be really exciting because Derek still maintains great ties with pretty much everybody that was ever a team owner of his or a sponsor of his that he's worked with over the years. And a lot of them he still does business with. And which is why we definitely wanted to make sure that we captured this story as best as possible to have that. And again, Derek and his wife, Alicia, have been very supportive of this. They're very excited about it. I'm excited to get it to you guys, and I hope you guys are looking forward to it at the same time. So, yeah, we're making very good progress. We're up to 4 reviews from reviewers, including Mike Joy. I think I have about another 5 that I'm waiting to hear back on. We might not hear from all of them. That's always the way it goes, but that's okay. We cast a broad net. Whatever we hear back from, we'll see what happens. Yeah, then we'll be one step closer to doing that. The other thing, I don't know if I mentioned this on stream before, and I will do a promo for this closer to the date, is I'm planning on doing a live stream on Tuesday, November 14th to help promote the book there. We're still figuring out book signings and stuff like that. I won't have physical copies on hand that day because that's basically when copies do go out. But the book will be available that day. We'll kind of have some fun with that. And so stay tuned to my channel for more details on that coming up here. So, yeah, we got that coming up. On the video front, I know I've been getting a lot of questions about videos. As you can tell with the preparations for the book, that's kind of been on kind of the back burner. My original plan was to get at least one video done by November 1st. That window is kind of closing in a little bit. It depends on how things play out through this week. After the review window closes, and if everything is pretty much locked in for the book and I can set that aside, that may free up some time to at least get a quick video in before we go to Phoenix in November. That will determine the worst case scenario, and again, really not a bad scenario, is I'll be working on all of those after we get back from Phoenix, and we of course have the off season there at that point, so there won't be updates on the Lastcar page and through that. And that'll free up a lot of time to finish these videos and get them going. And I hope that that'll be something where we get kind of a whole sequence of them posted, similar to what we had last year with when 500 Days came out and we had a number of episodes come together. So again, among these are the next episode of 500 Days on the Spring Darlington race, a Mike Harmon project on the hauler that was stolen from him in 2020. That is another video that's been recorded and is about ready to go. There's another script that I've had come together in the last 2 weeks that is, I'll admit, has kind of taken up most of my attention. It was just, I don't want to give too many details on it because it's going to be kind of different from some of my other videos. But it basically became something I was researching just out of curiosity. And then more and more material came together. It's like, oh man, I think this would be a pretty good video. So that's kind of something that I'm working on too. So basically that's been kind of most of my focus last couple of weeks has been the research for that project, as well as getting the Derek Cope book finished. So I do apologize. It's been a while, the videos. I do appreciate, especially the support of those of you in the Patreon here, as well as the support of those of you following this channel and sharing the videos on this channel. But believe me, folks, it's going to be well worth the wait, as this book will, as well too. So, especially since the book has now been, pretty much the release date will be about 5 years since I started working on it, really, with my first interview with Derek at the Starcom hauler at Phoenix in 2018. So that'll be exciting there too. But that's going to be kind of the theme of going into this winter here, is kind of catching up on a lot of these projects that have been kind of hanging on here. And yeah, I think that'll be exciting. So we're in position here to we're definitely gonna get you guys some more content here very soon. So definitely thank you guys for tuning in. Let's see. Which category is leading? I see a couple for tracks. Let's see. 1, 2, see 2 for NASCAR. Wild card. Yeah, we could do some NASCAR questions here. I don't think we've done that category in a bit, so we'll kind of do that. Do we have any calls on inspection? I don't believe we do. We got the Bills playing the Giants tonight. Very exciting. Almost thought of wearing the Bills hat tonight, but that was the other thing. Definitely had to bring out the new Lastcar hat. So, whoop, they get into focus. There you go. So, a brand new one here. So you don't have the other one. We're getting the we're getting the other one cleaned up there too. So that'll still be part of our cycle. But this one here, I'm very pleased with the color that came out on this one. I don't know how well it shows up on camera. But yeah, I got kind of a bright orange. Still got a little bit of red there for the .info. But I have this is a hat that I've set aside now for the streams. And I have another hat that I've set aside specifically for the races. So that's always a lot of fun. So we'll have that there on the show coming up. Let's see. We still have the unofficial race results. Yeah, still just listed as an accident for Hocevar, not the DVP, which makes sense as he was towed behind the wall pretty quick there. Yeah, Reddick, Blaney, and Buescher are going to be the ones to watch next week by being below the line and then losing a bit more ground there for sure. But very excited to see Hocevar and what he could do next year. I'm glad he got the ride with Spire Motorsports. I guess that was the other bit of news that broke this last week. So we'll see what happens. All righty. Okay. First question, folks. What NASCAR sponsor is part of every recipe in 1998's NASCAR Cook's Cookbook? Got a food question to lead off. What NASCAR sponsor is part of every recipe in 1998's NASCAR Cook's Cookbook? Just checking this out here too. Putting out a short. Yeah, I've thought about making some shorts. I have kind of some other concepts that would probably be decent short content. I'd rather not make my long form content into it. I don't think it would fit the format well, but we'll see. What NASCAR sponsor is part of every recipe in 1998's NASCAR Cook's Cookbook? We got several guesses for Tabasco. Is it unanimous? And it is correct. The answer is Tabasco. Tabasco is correct. Oh, you got that one there. Looks like Zachary Leffler. Looks like you were the first one on that one. Okay. What driver, next question, folks, what driver threatened to pay a $5,000 NASCAR fine in pennies in 1997? Let me read that again. What driver threatened to pay a $5,000 NASCAR fine in pennies in 1997? $5,000 in pennies. Threatened to pay NASCAR. Which driver threatened to pay that to NASCAR in 1997? All right, which driver? What driver, rather? Threatened to pay a $5,000 NASCAR fine in pennies in 1997. Hey there, Racer. 106-2000. Thank you for tuning in. Just in time for some trivia here. We'll do a few questions here to wrap up the show for this evening, and we'll see if we have any other inspection results. Can't wait to see how the Truck Series broadcast goes next Saturday. That'll be itself a little bit of a story, potentially. Are they going to bring their A game, or are they going to do it kind of the same way they've been doing it all season? We do not have any results from inspection yet, at least not on Pockrass's page, so we'll see. What driver threatened to pay a $5,000 NASCAR fine in pennies in 1997? I guess this is for Gordon and Yarborough and Christopher Bell and Darrell Waltrip and Mark Martin and Bobby Hamilton. All right, here we go. Which driver threatened to pay a $5,000 NASCAR fine in pennies in 1997? The answer is Rusty Wallace. It was indeed Rusty Wallace. Clint Will, I think you were... Oh, nope, Kids Car Crazy. You were the first one to it. Clint Will, you were second, and then Willie B in third, I'm seeing here. No Tires, Just Gas, you got it as well. All righty. Okay, next question. What Winston executive created the 1991 Daytona 500 Desert Storm promotion? What Winston executive created the 1991 Daytona 500 Desert Storm promotion? This was called Operation Desert Support, by the way, the program that it's referring to. So what Winston executive created this in the 1991 Daytona 500? That is our next question. I'll also tell you, on the subject of videos, in case he's watching here, Brian Hallman, big thanks to you. He just sent a treasure trove of pictures for yet another video that I'm working on here. So that's actually like 4 projects in the mail. Like I say, we're gonna be in the process of reeling these in here pretty soon. They're luckily in different phases of production. The pictures, this is actually for one where the script is just starting to kind of come together. But yeah, I'm hopeful getting these on the script, especially where I don't sound as congested over the microphone, is going to sound a lot better here. So we'll get that together here, and that'll be a lot of fun. But big thank you to Brian Hallman. He sent over some fantastic material on another project that I'm working on here. So yeah, the visuals are definitely going to be something big on these upcoming works. What Winston executive created the 1991 Daytona 500 Desert Storm promotion? I guess is for Cole Trickle and Camel Joe and Burt Reynolds and RJ Reynolds and T. Wayne Robinson. Matvell is that an I or an L? I think it's an I. Matt V. Mishkov. There you go. Darude Sandstorm. Yeah, there we go. Ty Norris. All right, here we go. What Winston executive created the 1991 Daytona 500 Desert Storm promotion? The answer is indeed T. Wayne Robertson. T. Wayne Robertson is correct. Zachary Leffler, you got that right away. Kevin Love, you as well. Charles Peterson, yep. T. Wayne Robertson. Alrighty, so we'll just do one more question here for tonight, folks. We'll be a little bit shorter of a show here today. Last question for the evening, folks. Who got the pole for the 1976 Daytona 500 when 3 faster times were thrown out? Who got the pole for the 1976 Daytona 500 when 3 faster times were thrown out? Matt V. Matt Vey? Beast of Metal? Okay, learned something new today. Who got the pole for the 1976 Daytona 500 when 3 faster times were thrown out? The pole for the 1976 Daytona 500. Don't look it up. Try to guess it. All righty. Okay, we got several guesses. We got 15 seconds. We got Benny Parsons. We got Tiny Lund. David Pearson. Parsons. Okay, here we go. Who got the pole for the 1976 Daytona 500 when 3 faster times were thrown out? And the answer is Ramo Stott. Ramo Stott. I don't think anybody got that one. Ramo Stott is the correct answer. I think we had this one before, and somebody was guessing which 3 drivers were had their times thrown out. I think maybe that was the way the question was phrased. Ramo Stott is the correct answer. So there you go. So hey, another time where the underdog did good. So there you go, folks. Well, we're going to take one more look at technical inspection, see if we have anything here. Nope, we still have the unofficial points, showing Larson on to the next round. Byron, Truex, and Hamlin in the next 3 spots. Bell out by 2 points after his runner-up finish. Then Tyler Reddick, Ryan Blaney, and Chris Buescher rounding out the group. Seeing on here as well, very exciting to see getting Kyle Larson behind the wheel of the IndyCar this week, passing his rookie test. Congratulations to him. That's no doubt going to be a huge story next year. So we'll find out what happens there too. Alrighty. Well, that'll do it for our show this week, folks. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And in the meantime, at Lastcar on Brock is my Twitter feed. Patreon.com/Lastcar on Brock if you're interested in joining for some bonus content. You can also get your name on the door magnet that I have already ordered and has come in now for the Phoenix race. Probably show that on the show before we head out here, so that'll be fun. We got more room on that coming up. We also got more content coming up here on this channel. Cope is coming out on Tuesday, November 14th. Exclusively on Amazon, so we'll have some more details on that coming up. In the meantime, our next show is going to be next Sunday after the Cup Series race at Homestead. We'll talk about the triple header weekend, trucks and Xfinity on Saturday, and then Cup on Sunday. We'll wrap up the action from there, and we'll find out if the next person punches their ticket into the Cup Series playoffs, or if we see a different outcome this time around. It'll be interesting to find out one way or the other, but we'll definitely be talking on the show here. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you all next time.